Hailing back from the days of Meteorot R in 1999, this Ishikawa Goemon type is certainly set to set the fire of battle and steal the riches of victory for any team he's on. It is KMG00 Goemon, with a kit of missile, fire, Gatling, float legs, and the leg ability of adversity, which buffs all leg stats minus armor and heavy limit for every debuff applied to self. Now, as yet another model being added to the Spotlight banner, Goemon is a model that the community has begged for and pleaded for quite some time, and as another model iconic to the anime that anyone may know and love, it's only natural to finally see this model finally join the fray with a fresh model, a kit basically similar to what he had before, and as such makes him moderately user-friendly to people who are just getting into Meteorot S and need something simple to help start them out. Missile on the head part is a gunpowder-based skill that basically is a full AoE. This means that upon attacking the target, all damage that Goemon will deal will be spread load across all active parts on the target. This means that if it's a fully healthy target, that's a quarter damage to each part, or if they're injured at say 3 or 2 parts, it'll only be about a half or a third damage each. The only time this rule is ignored is if the enemy has Conceal, which will funnel all damage toward that one part, but this also applies to any shields that are in effect, which it will do the same thing with. Fire on the right arm is an ailment skill that, upon attacking the target, will inflict them with a damage over time status, which will very slowly whittle their HP down over time the longer the fight drags on. Which means that while he may not be able to break anything by himself immediately, as fire or any DOT status cannot break parts on its own, it does make them progressively easier for Goemon himself or an ally of his to finish the job if he can't do it himself. Gatling on the left arm is a conventional shooting skill that has a scattered AoE, meaning that unlike Missile, which will damage all parts evenly, scattered AoE Gatling means it will damage one part, the one it targets normally, and then 2 others at random, or even the same part repeatedly, at 1/3 additional damage on top of that. Both of these parts, Gatling and Missile, can be made incredibly useful with the Silent Leader system to help flush out who the leader is by using a bunch of scattered shots and try to help gauge the field for who the leader might be, so that makes it easier for you to figure out if you want to take them down quickly or if you want to stall now that you know who it is. Float legs means that he'll have relatively good coverage across all terrains, as float legs have A rank across the board in compensation for having relatively decent stats across the board. Minus, of course, any boss type bots that, of course, will have absurdly broken stats. This can extend to, say, Metal Eater or Spinag, or Meta Change Grain and so on, but Goemon as a Spotlight bot does not play that game, but still brings some pretty solid specs to the table. In terms of armor, he's packing some pretty good stats as well at almost 3,900 HP for the head, both arms at 3,350 apiece, and his legs at 4,300. He's a pretty chunky fellow, so he can most certainly take some hits decently well without anything murdering or taking him down too quickly. In topic of his leg stats and his damage reduction, he's also kind of balanced across the board too, but again, as a friendly reminder, these are stats before any additional bonuses or modifiers, so these are just the as-is numbers if you were to look at him in the stat sheet. But with the base mobility of 788, he's already off to a pretty good start with a pretty nice base mobility to get him started off the block. Again, minus any meta rodder or terrain bonuses on top of that. An evade of 823 isn't too shabby. He may or may not dodge or graze much, or anything at all. It just kind of depends on his particular mood that day, if you wanted to call it that. A melee resist of 1061 isn't too bad. It's not terrible, but also not great either. But he can most certainly hold his own up close and personal decently well, but just don't stick him in combat longer than he really needs to be. And the same can be especially said for his shoot resist at 637, which is going to be a very messy pain point for him, as it means that up close and personal, he can probably hold his own decently well, but when it comes to taking a gun show with anyone from afar, he probably will not be able to hold that contest up very well on his own without somebody to defend him or keep him healthy with his HP. But he does tie a lot of this together decently well with the leg ability of Adversity, and it's kind of a weird ability, as in you may or may not use it at all, or it'll be something you use constantly. as adversity will buff all of his leg stats in addition to any other modifiers for every debuff he has applied to himself. So this can be anything from wave, or hold, or deathlock, or bug, or virus, or anything like that. Basically, every negative ailment he has applied to himself, his leg stats go up to make him just a little bit faster, a little bit more resistant to damage, or more likely to dodge attacks as long as he has those on them. But it is kind of a double-edged sword, so do make sure that if you are going to use KMG Goemon, exercise caution and just make sure that you're not going overboard with letting him get slapped with every ailment under the sun either. This being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate KMG Goemon a pretty solid 6 out of 10. Given that fire is an ailment that not a lot of people use these days in terms of competitive, it still does synergize with his kit decently well. So while the fire is already kind of eating away at the HP over time, it will make it a lot easier for Missile or Gatling to break multiple things at once as long as that ailment stays in effect, and adds a little more viability to KMG Goemon as a whole. Even if it does require him to kind of keep using it more than once, and just kind of hope and pray that he outlasts the enemy long enough to actually do that. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him equally at a 6 out of 10 as well for these very same reasons. Fire you may or may not use often, if at all, if I'm being completely honest with you. Missile or Gatling you may or may not use either, but thanks to the Silent Leader making AoE skills a lot more viable, that'll be completely up to you. But Float Legs with Adversity is a nice bonus to have, so I'm not actively encouraging that you purposely get them slapped with every ailment ever to benefit from that bonus, but think of it more as a compensation, conditional compensation, I guess, for lack of a better term. Just to help keep that competitive edge on the field as long as there are enemies using ailments. But if they aren't using any, well, it's there in case you need it.